Okay, we're ready to get started. Acts chapter 23 is where our Bible class will get started today. Acts chapter 23. Now, we're nearing the end of the book, so then we all got to get together and decide what we're going to do next once we, Lord willing, finish the book of Acts. So let's go over what we've covered so far here. I usually try to do on Sunday mornings a New Testament book. And on Sunday nights, I work on doing an Old Testament book. Or not Sunday nights, Wednesday nights, work on doing an Old Testament book. So I kind of switch back and forth. So I'd rather do a New Testament book on Sunday morning, but I don't have to. And we could cover some other subject if you'd like. What I've studied so far with y'all in the 2.5 years I've been here. The book of James. We did James. We did Romans. And we've done Acts. What else have we done? Did I really spend 8 months a book? 6 months a book? I may actually spend 6 months a book. Okay. James, Romans, and Acts. What else would you like? Is there another New Testament book that appeals to you one way or the other? I mean, they all appeal to you. That you would like to cover? Huh? Hebrews? Okay. All right. Huh? Y'all like to do Hebrews? Okay. You got the old joke, you know. It's where in the Bible it says the man has to turn on the coffee machine in the morning. He has to get up and turn the coffee machine on. You know, Hebrews. So, I don't know if y'all have heard that one or not. It's a rough one. Man, rough one. Goodness. Okay, so we'll work on Hebrews. Now, I don't know when that'll start. Whenever I finish on Acts is when we'll get there. We start in 25 and go through 25, 26, 27. The way I like to look at these three chapters is to focus on government. Because we see here where Paul is getting started, heading towards Rome, towards the climax or the end of the book. And as he is going through, he is going to be dealing with how to function under the Roman government. He's going to be on trial several times. He's going to be using the government for this or that or whatever else. So as we get started, what is the Christian's role in government? Should we participate in government, be active in government? Should Christians vote? Should Christians campaign? Should Christians hold office? What do you think? Absolutely. Okay. Why or why not? What are some reasons people have given in the past for not participating in government? Huh? Dealing with crooks. Okay. All right. Okay. It's hard to find an honest politician sometimes. Okay. All right. What are some other reasons? It's what? Okay, they're tired of the government. What were you saying?
Some people look at it as a connection between religion and state.
Okay, you got issues with church and state. And that's a problem that comes up a lot of times. A lot of times, like if I preach about abortion, somebody says you shouldn't be so involved in politics at church. Well, the church was involved with moral issues before the politics ever were. And so I preach on homosexual marriage now as much as I did before as a political issue. I preach on abortion, whether it's in November, whether it's in January, whether it's an election year or not, because God cares about the unborn. He cares about those folks. I preach on the way in which we treat the poor, whether it's an election year or whether it's not. Those things, moral issues, need to be spoken from the pulpit. And those issues were there and were preached on before people decided they were political topics. They were preached before as a political topic, and I hope they're preached after it's considered to be a political topic, because God's word stands forever. The nation shall rise and fall, but the Lord is always there. We see that in Daniel chapter 2. Yeah, it is a violation of the freedom of speech. That's right. Okay. All right, so you see there's kind of a tension sometimes in the idea of politics and the idea of using the political idea and whether Christians should be involved or not. You look at history of churches of Christ, especially through the 1800s, you see many people who are pacifist. One of the reasons for that was because of the issues we had during the Civil War. There are a lot of Christians who lived in Ohio, a lot of Christians who lived in Kentucky, a lot of Christians who lived in Tennessee, and even further down south. And sometimes you would have good, faithful Christians wearing blue, and sometimes you would have good, faithful Christians wearing gray. And a lot of people are having trouble getting their mind wrapped around the fact that Christians who belong to a higher and a greater kingdom were shooting a gun back and forth at each other and trying to kill one another. It's a disconnect right there, isn't it? And so you'll have people, as you study through history, people like David Lipscomb in Nashville, who really pushed that we were not to be involved in politics in any way. He had the opinion that you shouldn't even vote, that he belonged to a higher kingdom, and he didn't want any part of that. Now, a lot of that was because in Nashville, one Sunday they'd have a Union preacher, next Sunday they'd have a Confederate preacher. And you couldn't look like you're on one side or the other without getting in trouble and without endangering the Lord's church. You had brother against brother. And so several pulpits, the Central Church in McMinnville, if you ever get a chance to go down McMinnville, I think it's downtown McMinnville, they'll have plaques on the side of their pulpit. Their pulpit's been around a while, where different people have preached there. And you'll get down into the 1860s, and even James Garfield, who would later be president, preached there. They conquered that area. As he was traveling through, he was a Union general, and he was also an elder in the Lord's church. And so he held services that day. A few weeks later, they were pushed back, and Confederate came in. A few weeks later, he came back through. So it's interesting seeing that. It's kind of a piece of history there. Nowadays, I think mainly among our people, we are usually political. We believe you should vote. God put us here for this reason, to influence our nation. In the Old Testament, you read about Daniel. Was Daniel involved in politics? Did he influence his government to go towards God? He sure did. I think as Christians, we need to recognize that our vote needs to be more than just about serving ourselves economically, serving ourselves as far as personality, and should be pointed more towards voting towards trying to get our nation back to God. The more godly of the two. Sometimes that's a tough choice. Yeah, as much as you can, vote for who Jesus would vote for if Jesus was here and voting. Not sure he's a U.S. citizen, so you'd have trouble voting, in some places at least. Okay, so that's what we're going into. That's what I want us to look at today. Let's read this introduction here. God created government in order to maintain order among men, and so we must show respect for our government, but we also must continue to show a greater allegiance to God. This will cause us to be good citizens and even better Christians. Another parallel passage to read with this, and we studied this subject quite a bit. Well, that was a year and a half ago, so maybe not many people remember it. Romans 13. We are to be submissive to our government. God has put it here for a reason. All right, let me run over to Acts 23 here. In Acts 23, here we are. Paul is here before the council. Let's start in verse 1. Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, "Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest, Ananias, commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. And Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? And those who stood by said, Do you revile God's high priest? Then Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was a high priest, for it is written, You shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. All right. Well, what's interesting about this is you'll run across a little background here. You've got two high priests primarily in the Gospels. Ananias is one. Anybody remember who the other one was? Starts with C. Caiaphas. Somebody said Caiaphas. That's good. Okay. Now to deal with Ananias or Annas here and Caiaphas is they're related. One's an uncle, one's a nephew. Okay. Or father and grandson, but uncle and nephew. So here we are with that. And the reason they were here was because they were the highest bidder to the Romans. They weren't here because of their bloodline, connecting them all the way back to Aaron. And while they were Aaron's descendants, they were not the right high priest. Now, that's interesting as you and I read this verse, because was he a legitimate high priest? No, he was not a legitimate high priest, and he certainly was not doing God's bidding. But did Paul still show him respect? Paul did show him respect. This is a very fascinating passage to me, because here Paul is, he's standing before the Sanhedrin, and he begins speaking. And as soon as he begins speaking, Ananias is so angry that he goes up and he slaps Paul, which is against the law. You are not allowed to do that. And so Paul gets angry, goes off on him, starts telling him, you are not supposed to do that. You're a whitewashed wall. You're a big hypocrite. But once he realizes who he is, even though he's illegitimate, and even though he is not following the law, Paul shows him respect. Now, as you and I think about that, it's important for us to show respect to those people even when we disagree with folks. Now, what does respect for authority look like in a nation that has freedom of speech? Following along with the law you don't agree with, as long as it doesn't break God's law. Yeah, that's right. Well, many of our laws do break God's law. That's right. Okay, but as far as we can go, you show respect for who God has placed in those situations. Daniel was under Nebuchadnezzar. Was Nebuchadnezzar a good king? At least starting out? Not at all. Nebuchadnezzar was the head of the army that had gone to Jerusalem and had killed everybody, had maimed everybody, and hauled them all the way back to Babylon. He had defiled those people in so many ways. And yet, what was Daniel's actions toward Nebuchadnezzar? Always with respect, right? Okay? And it's important for us to show respect to the people who are in office. Now, can I every once in a while say, man, I don't like the mayor, or I don't like the governor, or I don't like the president? We can say that, can't we? You can respect the office, but not respect the person. But you have to respect the person to a certain sense because he fills the office. You have to be careful with where you're at there. Now, this is a matter of opinion. This is how I approach it. I very rarely try to show anybody my political affiliation, whether it be Republican or Democrat, because in my job, at least in my work and my mission, I want people to get to heaven. That's what I'm after. If they happen to be Republican or Democrat, I could talk to them all day about what I think they ought to be doing and where they ought to be voting and why this person's dumb and that person's dumb or whatever else. But I can get everybody to vote Democrat, and some of them will still go to heaven and some will still go to hell. I can get everybody to vote Republican, straight ticket every time. Some of them will go to heaven, some will still go to hell. What really matters to me is eternal destiny. And so, yes, I speak out for the people I like, and yes, I vote every time I have an opportunity, but I try to put the kingdom of God first in each and every situation. It's one of the reasons why I usually try not to show my political affiliation very much. And so that's something I think that's pretty important, which is there. Something important for us to look at. But we show respect even when the wrong guy wins the election. And sometimes we wonder, how in the world did that person win, right? But even when the wrong person wins, we still show respect, because that's our idea of showing respect to God as well. Well, here is Paul sitting before the Sanhedrin, and he recognizes, okay, here's the high priest. And as he recognizes this is not going to go well. You ever start a conversation and realize this is not going to happen well? Here he is standing right in front of this person, realizes this is not going to go well. So he uses a tactic. Sadducees. What was different about their belief than the Pharisees? Right. There was a Greek influence there among them. There's a Greek influence, and so they did not believe in an afterlife. They did not believe that you lived beyond death. You're dead like Rover. When you're dead all over, right? They believe there's no afterlife which is there. You go back to John 8, and Jesus is talking to the Sadducees, and they ask him, here's the question. Somebody dies, and, who's he going to be married to? Well, he's not going to be married to anybody. We're not married that way in heaven. Another time the Sadducees come to him, and they begin asking him. Now, they begin asking him about the afterlife. Jesus does not go back to the book of Daniel with him to talk about the afterlife. That's where we would go if we're using the Old Testament. But Sadducees did not believe Daniel was inspired. They believed only the first 5 books of the Bible. That's all they saw as inspired. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So what did Jesus do with them? He went back to their books and proved it. He said, before Abraham was, I am. And by looking at the tense of speech there, it shows that he is still the God of Abraham. Therefore, Abraham must still be in existence somewhere. And so that's the way the Sadducees were. So Paul's looking here and he sees that these two people are angry. And as he sees these two people are angry, he sees the way that you divide them. And that's by talking about the afterlife. Sadducees, half of them, don't believe in an afterlife. The Pharisees, on the other half, do. And so he says, by the way, I'm preaching a message about the resurrection from the dead. Suddenly, everybody who's a Pharisee says, well, wait a second. We like hearing that, and we're going to be on Paul's side. This guy used to be a Pharisee. And so instead of all the focus being on Paul, suddenly all the focus was on each other as they were fighting through. And so the Roman soldier came to save him. Yeah. Oh, man. You're not supposed to ask hard questions. Where is the spirit and the soul separated? Are you talking Hebrews 4:12? Even to the division of soul and spirit? Okay. Okay. You got 3 parts of a person. Okay? The body, the soul, and the spirit. Now, a lot of this comes from a fella in Greece named Plato. Okay? Not the Plato you ate as a kid. This is the Plato you studied in college, a philosopher. Okay? The body, the soul, and the spirit. Now, there is a constant debate throughout the first couple of centuries, and it exists even today in some religious groups as well, whether there's 2 parts or whether there's 3 parts, or whether there's just 1 part. Most Greeks believed in 1 part, and that was the body. Now, the Jews believed in the body and the soul. Okay? Now, the body, soul, and spirit were there. That's where Scripture seems to lead us. Now, the question is, what is the body, the soul, and the spirit? You got your sukkah and your pneuma. Now,
ashes to ashes and dust to dust.
Yes, sir. Ashes, ashes, dust to dust. Right. So, well, let's just talk about guts, or the whole guts of the matter. I'll take the whole hour talking about this. Your body has a spirit, and your body has a soul. Okay? And I've said that the wrong way. We'll come back to that later. You got a body, you got a spirit and a soul. A spirit is what animates us. Right. Yeah. The spirit is what animates us. When you look at me, I am Mark. Now, my body doesn't have a spirit. My spirit has a body. This is a tool. Okay? And that's the reason I remember me as an 18-year-old kid. Okay? Because my spirit doesn't change, but my body does. I can't do the things I used to be able to do when I was 18. Now, your spirit is what animates you. Your soul is what's given from God. And so there's not a lot of division between the spirit and the soul, necessarily. There is, when you get down to it, your soul is what is given by God, and your soul lasts forever, as does your spirit. Is that right? Okay. Your soul lasts forever, as does your spirit. But the soul is the gift that comes from God, and it's also animated. So you have that spirit which is there. So when I get to heaven, you're going to know who I am. When you get to heaven, I'm going to know who you are, because you're animated. Now, our body is going to be totally different. What's it going to look like? I don't know, but I'm in good company. 1 John chapter 3 tells us that we have no idea what this body is going to look like, but our body is going to look like the body of Jesus. And John says that's enough. Go to 1 Corinthians 15, starting in verse 51 and going through the end of the chapter. He says, hey, this corruption will put off its corruption, put on its immortality. This part that's mortal shall put off that's mortal and put on be immortal forever. Now, what we're going to look like, we don't know. If you looked at a wheat seed, a grain of wheat, you would never have an idea of what a plant would look like, because it's totally different. Get a kernel of corn off one of these places out here, one of these stalks out here. Looking at that kernel, you would never have an idea that if you planted it, that's what it's going to come back looking like. But Paul says that's what it's like. That wheat has to die, be planted in order to be made into a plant. Same way you and I have to die. We have to be changed in the twinkling of an eye to become what God has planned for us to be in the afterlife. So I don't know what I'm going to look like, but I know it's going to be awesome. And it's going to be great because our body will look like the body of Jesus. And anytime you see Jesus in the post-resurrection era, especially in the book of Revelation and also in Acts 7, he looks pretty awesome. So that's a good thing. Now, going back to that, oh, you got another statement?
Will a man's spirit witness for the soul at judgment?
The question is, will a man's spirit witness for the soul? I am not sure. I'm not sure. Now, I know that each one of us shall give an account of the way in which we've lived. And I know that we will have to answer for things which we have done. Now, I don't know the intricacies of that necessarily. And I'm not sure anybody would. There may be some people who really get into that and study that a little bit more closely than I have. I know our bodies will be different. We'll be caught up in the air and we'll be with him forevermore. And I know that our bodies will be like Christ's bodies. But I know we'll have a physical body of some sort, which is a fascinating aspect or thought which is there. It's not just a spirit resurrection. You have a lot of people who have misunderstandings. Some folks who believe that the Lord came back in 1914, they believe in a whole soul sleep and all this other stuff that's not found in Scripture. Yeah?
Did you think that our body would be material?
We're told that we shall be raised and that we shall be caught up in the air with him. So that's not a spirit.
I think it'd be spiritual.
You think it'll be a spiritual body when we're up there? Well, yeah, I don't think it's a question of, I don't think that's a question of fellowship in any way at all. There's a book in our library. I thought he was in here. Okay. Your husband's not here. I was about to talk about the church library. Yeah. Okay, well, that's an excused absence. All right. You have to let him listen to the thing because we're going to talk about the library. All right. Book in there by Guy Woods, Shall We Know One Another in Heaven. It's red, hardback, about that tall, and it discusses a lot of this a whole lot more fully than I can discuss it. His brain was way above my brain. His ways are way above my ways, to paraphrase Paul. But it's an interesting book to read through and look at. Shall we have a physical body? Well, let me not take up all the time on that one. Because, boy, we could go forever on that. All right, government, yes? Well, yeah, you got Matthew 17, Transfiguration. You've got the end of 2 Samuel, where there's 1 Samuel. The end of 1 Samuel, where Samuel is brought back by the witch of Endor. Okay, you've got that one, and then you've got the actions of Jesus after he was raised. You've got that issue as well, and then of course you have the personality, as you look there in Revelation chapter 7. So there's a lot of passages you can go to and work through. The problem is trying to figure out the implications of each one of those that goes across. Yes. Well, yes. Yes, but we can communicate in heaven. Okay. And so that's one of those things, we're going to have personality when we get to heaven. We're going to be us when we go to heaven. We're going to be us if, God forbid, any of us end up in hell. We're going to have that personality which is there. But a lot of that stuff is just not as explained as well as I want it to be. And, Jesus talks about hell close to 40 times if you take all the Gospels together. I realize a lot of those are parallel. And he describes hell greatly. Heaven, he doesn't describe a lot. He just tells us, you want to be there, and I'm going to be there with you. We're not going to heaven to hang out on a golden street or see a pearly gate. We're not going to heaven because we don't want to cry anymore. The point that Jesus is making, you want to go to heaven because God is there. That needs to be your motivation. Not money, not ease of life. You want fellowship with God. And so there's not a lot more explained about heaven than that we're going to look like Jesus and we're going to be with Jesus. Now, we can really parse to the point of, well, the soul's there and the spirit is there and the soul and spirit, but we're still together, but the body's gone or the body's still here. And we can parse to, well, this is what heaven's going to look like and this is what heaven's going to feel like. But that wasn't really what the inspired writers were after necessarily. 1 Corinthians 15, the whole point of that, and 1 and 2 Thessalonians, the whole point of that, live right so that you can be resurrected and be with Jesus. Live right so you can be with Jesus and with all the loved ones who are there. And that was really what he's after when he's getting into that. So it's kind of hard to go back and get there. It's kind of like using a tool for something it's not designed to sometimes. And I know y'all don't do that. But the other day I needed a hammer to work on my lawnmower. Couldn't find a hammer. I had a crescent wrench. Broke the crescent wrench because I was using it for something it wasn't designed for. Did it work? Well, sort of. But it wasn't the ideal situation. And sometimes when we get into that discussion, it's kind of like using a crescent wrench as a hammer. Yes, it works, and yes, we can get some places with it, but we're kind of missing the intention of what we're after there. Okay, I'm an Acts 8:4 preacher. I go everywhere preaching the word, get off the subject all the time. So let's go back here. Paul is here. He is now in prison because the Roman soldiers have saved him. We look in verses 11 through 35. You see very quickly, Jesus comes to him and says, hey, be of good cheer, be happy. You have done well in Jerusalem. Now you're about to head to Rome. Now, this is going to be cool as we go through it. So here we go. We see these men. There's 40 people who joined a conspiracy. And they promise they're not going to eat or they're not going to drink until they have taken care of Paul and put him to death. Paul has a nephew who comes and tells him, is it a nephew or a cousin? Those words are always so similar. Verse 16, son-in-law, sister's son. Is that a nephew? Okay. I missed that day in social studies. Which is a sad thing because in Marshall County, you need to know the difference between a nephew and because we're all related, you know? So you got to know all these things. I always tell my sons, you ever come home with a girl, you need to know the mother's maiden name. So we can figure out if y'all can still date or not. All right. So you run across here, and the son comes and tells him. And so he tells the commander, and the commander gets a Roman brigade. And I mean, this is shock and awe here when you look at who is surrounding Paul and takes him over to Caesarea, takes him out of the situation, which is here. Now, here's what's neat about that situation to me. Paul is using a totally pagan group of people to protect himself in this situation to accomplish something that's good. Now, that seems strange to me when God can use something totally evil to protect his people and use it for something good. You get what I'm saying? You had the Jews who were, I guess, evil as well, but God uses the Romans to defeat the Jews so that Paul can be taken care of well. All right, so what lesson does that teach us concerning government? Is it wrong to use government for our purpose? Not if it promotes the cause of Christ. Right. If it promotes the cause of Christ, there's nothing wrong with using the auspices of government. Okay? God has put government here for a reason. And if we can use government well, that's a good thing. Kirk Brothers was here Wednesday night. He talked about some of the work we did down in Jackson. That's the first time I met y'all. It was down there. Remember that? How many years ago was that? It's 2007. Yeah, that was a long time ago. All right. Well, they came down and spent, did y'all spend the night or just come by? Y'all spent the night there in the building with us. Katrina came through. And one of the secrets of what we had going on there that worked pretty well was we had a lot of people involved in government who went to church with us. And so when the hurricane came through, they shut everything down and shut down all the roads where nobody could go in or out because everything was so destroyed. They were afraid of looters, and there were a lot of racial tensions going on and everything else, so they had martial law. No one was allowed in or out. Well, one of the things that happened with Jackson was it was just north of that area. And so we got to work as a transfer station where if you brought materials to us, we, because of our connections to government, could transport materials down to the coast and distribute them. Now, one of the things we did, the Lord's Church on the coast of Mississippi and Louisiana is very weak. But we would always use the Lord's Church, that area, as a place of distribution to raise its place. Now, it worked well that way. We ended up, I don't remember the exact number, but we ended up transporting, by the time it was done, $23 million through there to the coast. And it was interesting because so many people were donating that way. Now, here's the reason why you give to the church, okay? You give to the Red Cross. About 60% of that actually goes to the people. The 40% goes to the bureaucracy. You give to any other charity, oftentimes it's less than that. Many charities you give, only 25% ends up going to the people. You give to the Lord's Church, how much of that goes? All of it. Absolutely all of it. I sure didn't get rich out of that whole thing, and neither did anybody else in the church. And so it's a much more pure way of helping other people. When there is a problem or an issue that goes on, disaster-wise, look to give through the church rather than giving through Red Cross, because 100% of it will go to everyone. Plus, Red Cross and most people have a checklist of things that you have to fill out in order to receive it, and a lot of other things. The church, they just hand it out. They invite you to come back some other time, but generally, here you go. It's a lot more pure way of helping folks. And so it was interesting seeing how that worked on. The day of the hurricane, we talked about having like a trailer come from Nashville, from disaster relief. And that first day, we had 3 trailers, and I think in the next 6 days, we had 181 trailers in our parking lot, people transporting stuff. So it's kind of an interesting thing that went on there. But anyway, there's nothing wrong with using that as far as government to be able to accomplish a greater and a better purpose. And that's the point which is being made here. Paul used the Roman army, and he's going to use the Roman system of government oftentimes in order to help him get where he needs to go. All right, 24, beginning in verse 1. This is one of my favorite parts of the book of Acts. I love the oratory in Acts, the speaking parts which are here. Tertullius is hired. He is we would say a lawyer. He is an orator. He is a guy who is designed to speak. That's his full-time job. And so they want to get the best lawyer anywhere around. They want to get the Johnny Cochran, as we would say in our country, back when he was alive, that can get anybody off of anything. And this is the guy they hire. So Tertullius comes and read the junk that he says here as he comes across. Now, this is 24. Let's begin in verse 2, okay? Now, imagine, I can't read this the way that he puts it, but notice how syrupy this comes across, okay? Verse 2, seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity is being brought to this nation by your foresight, we accepted always in all places most noble Felix with all thankfulness. Nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg to you by your courtesy a few words from us. For we have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple which we seized, and we seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. Okay, so what I want you to notice right there is just how syrupy we are. What's he say about Felix? Verse 2, we enjoy great peace and prosperity because of your foresight, right? Verse 3, you are noble and we are so thankful for everything that you've done. Verse 4, we don't want to be tedious, we don't want to bother you, but just give us a few words, all right? Notice how syrupy that is? Somebody comes to you, that syrupy, you're in trouble, right? Now notice how they describe Paul here in verse 5. This man is a plague. He is a creator of dissension, and he is a ringleader. See how syrupy he's coming across? Making Paul just absolutely as bad as we can. Of course, we were going to judge him and not even bother you in verse 6, but the Romans came in verse 7 and messed us up so we couldn't do anything. And so then there we are. Now, of course, Paul, when it comes up to him, he gives the same sermon he always gives concerning, as he calls it, the way. Concerning the church and concerning the gospel. Now, what do we learn as we look at that and look at that idea of Tertullius, which is there? We learned that Christianity can win any debate. Now, listen to that. Christianity can win any debate. A lot of times we have cowered ourselves into thinking we can't win. But any time that you put Christianity on an equal footing in any philosophical debate, Christianity wins. That's the point of the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 2, against the Jews, when Judaism was discussed, what was greater, Christianity, the gospel, or Judaism? Christianity came out on top. In Acts chapter 17, when Paul was there in the Agora on Mars Hill, as he was speaking to the great philosophers of the day, which was greater, the philosophies of man or God? God. Okay, so here we are. We have got the best lawyer that money can hire, and he is pouring it on super, super thick in front of this Roman official, and he is doing everything he can to destroy Paul. Paul just speaks plainly concerning his way. He says the same thing he's always said. Who's going to win out? God. God wins every time. Now, nowadays we have what's called new atheism. Not many people understand new atheism, but you feel it. Okay, new atheism is their Penn Jillette, is your Dawkins. Those folks are coming through. And they're saying that you have to be an idiot to believe in Christianity. It's just mythology from times past, and there is nothing to it. Now, you may not have heard that very much, but if you're under the age of 25, you hear it constantly. It comes across constantly. Okay? People are acting like you got to be an idiot to be a Christian. You put Christianity on equal footing in a discussion with anybody, what wins out? Christianity, okay? In the scientific community, they say if you believe in evolution, you have to. That argument's already done. That argument's already finished. If you put Christianity on equal footing, what wins? The account of Genesis or the modern scientific thought? The account of Genesis will win each and every time. But so often, we want to apologize for what the Bible says, and we want to back up, and we want to say, well, I hope it's right, and maybe it's right.
I know it says that, but I don't believe it.
A lot of people say that. And the greatest minds throughout history have believed in Scripture. And there have been a lot of people who have sworn they're going to destroy the Bible, and those people are forgotten in history, and the Bible's still here. And we still own Bibles. You may own it in an app, but you still own a Bible. And so Christianity will win every single time, no matter what you face and no matter what we're going through. Okay? I'm going to stop there. We're going to study chapter 25 next week because I want to go through and spend some time with Festus and look at some of his background and see what's going on here with this as it happens. All right, let's discuss what we learned today. We learned about the idea of religion and politics. We can be political, but don't allow it to cause a brother to stumble. Okay? Don't be so hard with your Barack Obama poster or your John McCain poster or your Mitt Romney poster that you end up driving somebody away from the Lord's church. Because those guys will be in office for 4 years or 8 years. The Lord will remain on his throne forever. Okay? You can use government. It's okay to take a tax break when the government offers a tax break, because they hardly ever do. It's okay to use government, but don't let government rule over you. Put God first in each and every situation. And realize no matter what's facing against you, even if it's the highest priced lawyer ever, plain, simple gospel will work every time. I was going to let y'all out early, and I missed it. Thanks for being here. Y'all have a good afternoon.